This is A New Angle, conversations about how we're doing and where we're going. I'm your host, Justin Angle. This show is supported by the Headwaters Foundation, First Security Bank, and the University of Montana College of Business. Hey folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. Today is our March edition of Incentives and Instincts, a recurring series in which I speak with economist and friend Bryce Ward about some of the broader challenges facing our society. It's also Pledge Week here at Montana Public Radio, so hit those phones and help us out. Bryce, how are you today?
I'm good, Justin. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Listeners might hear a little raspiness in my voice. I am one of the probably half of Missoula that is recovering or in some state of dealing with flu.
Pretty sure 100% have dealt with it like at least once, if not multiple times over the course of the past 2 months.
Yeah, seems like we are in it. Anyway, as I mentioned, it is Pledge Week here. We figured we would explore the concept of how do we as a society come to know what is happening and what is true. That appears to be something in peril and something the public radio model is at least somewhat insulated from. We'll talk about that. But Bryce, before we get into it, just describe the state of affairs. What is this problem how would you describe this as a problem?
We argue a lot, but never seem to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's hyperbole, right? Because there are things that we argue about and we do make movement on. I don't want to make it sound like there's nothing that we can agree that, that's a problem and actually see movement on.
Well, I think a symptom of the problem is that we are less aware of the progress than we should be.
That's probably right? But there certainly is the stuff that consumes most of the oxygen in the public discourse is stuff that we argue a lot about, and it doesn't seem like we move a lot. Or if we do move, it takes a long time for us to move. There's certainly lots of, war of attrition where people dig in and fight and, and there's all sorts of symptoms of this,
okay.
Right? Like, it's the cherry picking of studies, right? Or, people seizing on uncertainty from kind of institutions, like academics or whatever it is, or policy wonk type people saying, we're not sure about that, to insert their own certainty. Right. This all links back to what we talked about last month, right? Which is, how do people change their mind and make up their mind, because the reality is that there's a lot of what's driving this is there's a market for providing people what they want to hear.
Right.
Right. And so once you have a large function of, and it's not just the media, but, institutions in society, whether that's individual politicians, political parties, nonprofit groups, whatever it is, they benefit, whether via money or attention, from giving the people what they want, right? And giving people what they want doesn't always mean that they're now acting in the service of truth.
Right. So let's sort of break this down a little bit. I mean, a framework you use in here over and over again is this policy analysis 101. And the first step in that framework is describing where we are. And describing where we are is harder and harder to do now because it's hard to get an accurate version of where we are that we agree on.
Yeah. And look, it's worth acknowledging that part of this is because we live in a more abundant world of information.
Yes.
Right? Like, it was easy to get a small set of people to agree about where we are when only a small set of people were paying attention and even had the information to try and assess it.
And there was one person at 6:00 at night, the Walter Cronkite model, just telling us that's the way it is.
It was just a lot easier, right? Because you didn't have to deal with as much wrangling of information to try and come up with what you think the description of reality is.
And just the amount of information.
That's right.
Was much less
Much less, right? But that said, even I think an expectation would say, we've increased the amount of information that is available and accessible to people. We should be able to converge on some more precise, better version of what reality is, where we are.
That's the theory. That was the promise of the internet, right? We're going to have information abundance and we're going to get to the truth more effectively. Well, that was the promise of the internet, that it would create a free flow of information, more people could get directly to source material, and that would lead to a more educated populace and a better shared understanding of the truth. I mean, at least that was like perhaps hyperbolic, but the promise.
Well, I mean, and I think we have to acknowledge that for some people that is true.
Yeah.
Right? I certainly am more informed about a lot of things than I otherwise would have been.
And it's so much easier to get to a fact. I mean, you have to make judgments about whether that thing is a fact or not that you might not have had to make in the past. But gosh, I mean, we got these things in our pocket that could connect us with any piece of information we would ever want.
Yeah. The problem, again, I think it goes back to, how do we adjudicate, as a society and to the extent that individuals take their cues from culture and institutions in society, how are we trying to adjudicate? Because there certainly are places where we get stuck.
Yeah.
Right? There's certainly disagreements that appear to be ongoing over the course of decades that are frequently divorced from reality.
Okay.
Right? From what I think, and I'm going to, again, I have to impose my own judgment of reality, but, what I would say based on kind of more rigorous attempts to describe reality would say, right? The easy one right now is vaccines, right? We have lots of evidence about the benefits of vaccines. They're one of the most tracked things in the world. Really, there's no good evidence of, many of the harms that people claim. That's not to say that there aren't people who are in fact allergic to vaccines.
Sure.
There are. But we've got people who have been vaccinated for, widespread vaccination has been around for decades, right? So people have clearly managed to survive for decades. And we don't, and as I think as a general rule, we would say society is healthier now than it was. And if you,
at least as far as infectious diseases,
as far as infectious diseases, but even in terms of longevity.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so you can't say, oh, this is going to take years off the end of my life
Sure.
that wouldn't otherwise have been there because the math doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right. But, but we can pick lots of other examples, but, there's lots of places where we just haven't figured out how are we supposed to adjudicate reality and then move forward.
Well,
then the next couple steps of policy analysis 101.
Yeah. So let's start with like, what have we considered to be the institutions that help us get to this idea of what is happening and what is true? I mean, we've got categories, right? We've got the media, and we'll talk about the media. We've got the government. We've got think tanks. We've got universities. What else is in there?
Well, it depends. I mean, courts.
Yep. The justice system.
We've got, and then literally just like talking around the dinner table, right? All of those are, they're informal, but like, whatever, like going to a group meeting where you would end up talking about stuff with other people, right? Like, so we have had, throughout human history, the ability to kind of surface information, discuss it, and then figure out paths forward.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that, right? We still are doing that. I want to be clear. We still do that. But, the more high profile it is, the less it seems like we're good at getting to reality.
Okay.
It's it's secret Congress. I think we've talked about that before. Secret Congress gets stuff done. Right. Secret Congress is still able to kind of solicit information, come up with agreements, try stuff out, maybe resolve it, whatever, going forward. Right. So things can happen through that means. But when it comes to the high profile stuff, it seems like, there's just a lot of talking past each other because we lack a structure for resolving some big important policy questions. It's unclear how you change that because, in our world, like, we'll go do research but I've seen many an area where lots of research has been conducted. And look, all research, particularly in social sciences, is, imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
But, to the extent that you go back to last month, research is, leading people to update their priors. It just doesn't seem to ever move the needle.
It's a problem of capitalism. Like, capitalism is good at giving people what they want, not necessarily what they need. As a society, We kind of need the truth to function, or at least the closest approximation we can get. But we've created an information economy, and that includes all the institutions we've talked about, that is particularly good at giving people what they want and what they'll pay for.
Yeah. And that's I think the fundamental challenge, right? Is it's hard. Disagreement is supposed to be productive, right? Like debate is supposed to be about, it's a microcosm or a simulation of the market, right? It's supposed to be things competing with each other to try and figure out what is, the best idea or what's the, best way of describing stuff. And there's certainly the swath of the environment that we're talking about here. Disagreement is never supposed to be productive, right? It's not supposed to be about combining things. Disagreement is about winning. It's about trying to overpower and destroy the other side.
Okay.
It's, and ultimately disagreement is profitable, right?
Yes.
Like, I make a hypothetical purveyor of, discourse. I make my living through engagement. And engagement is not about resolving debates. The most engaged person, the person who's going to come back to me again and again and again, is the person who really wants to hear what I have to hear, what I have to say.
Yeah, and I guess I would press on that notion that disagreement is profitable and suggest a different gloss on it, and that would be that certainty is profitable. If you serve your audience certainty, that creates some form of structural disagreement because there's a range of viewpoints. But if you serve your audience certainty, that's what they want to hear.
Yes, but what they really want you to be certain about is that the other side is bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So it's about certainty, but it's also, we know this from the research in social media, right? The stuff that gets the most engagement on social media is negative claims about the opposing side.
And so why is this a problem now or in a different way?
I just think it's the scale of the information environment, right? And the way that, I can make a good living as a purveyor of discourse, satisfying a handful of people.
Okay.
Right? I don't need to get 100 million Americans to pay attention to me. Right? I can get 20,000 Americans to subscribe to my Substack and be a millionaire.
Okay.
Right? And so the challenge is that, so you create these little ecosystems where they can thrive and be fertilized without needing to ever come in contact with reality.
So individual citizen journalists, is that what you're talking about, or the audience?
Yeah, well, it doesn't have to be an individual. It can be a niche publication, right?
Yeah.
It can be any kind of, or even be a big publication.
Sure.
Right? But the point is that it says we must have an editorial viewpoint, right, that caters to the interests of this population, right? This talk radio, Rush Limbaugh was the genesis of this.
Sure.
Right? Roger Ailes sees what's happening in talk radio and says, oh, I can do that with Fox News.
And television.
And it just keeps going, right? And we just have gone down a cascade basically over the course of my adult life, right? From where, you had these larger things, but then there's still larger things. There's all sorts of surveys out there, studies where they'll plot media consumption.
Yeah.
Right. And yes, most people still consume some centrist media, right? But you have these very disparate ecosystems that don't interact with each other, right? They might interact via 1 or 2 degrees of separation through something in the middle, but you have, and the people that are consuming those, more extreme media things, they're the more extreme people. They're the more engaged people, right?
Sure.
And this is the key, right? Which is, well, let's just use the cable news. when cable news first started, it just looked like a news program that just kept repeating on loop, basically, right? You know, you couldn't watch CNN all day long when there
like
wasn't
the headline news network.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, but even just regular CNN, like, it's basically just the same thing, unless there's like some actual thing happening in the world.
It was like the Gulf War, the first Gulf War kind of transformed cable news.
Yeah, because there was
something useful.
There was something happening that you wanted to follow all the time. But there, on a normal day, it was just like the same news that you could watch at 6 o'clock at night, just being, you know, repeated every 2 hours with some filler.
Yeah.
You know, and okay, so there's a broad audience, right? But as we get more options for media, like the broad audience, they don't watch cable news, right? So who watches cable news? The dedicated cable news fan.
Right.
Right. And so then you get into, you know, what you see in, you know, even in fictional media, right? With audience capture, it's fan service, right? A lot of media, not all, a lot, is fan service. It exists to
please the fans.
To please the fans.
Yes, okay.
Right? And while fan service can, in some cases, be good, in some cases, it's not.
I guess the thing I'm curious about is like, what is structurally different? I mean, with journalism, we have tried, the business model for journalism since time immemorial has been advertising, or some way of monetizing your attention. Now, I think in the days of yore, like newspapers, for example, had a wide array of revenue streams tied to monetizing your attention. Like you had the classified ads, you had local business ads, you just had a lot of different sources of revenue, probably each somewhat small. And so no one source of revenue could influence or provide undue influence on the content. Is there a higher concentration of those revenue streams now? Or like what's happening where this distortion of what gets reported is more salient?
Again, a newspaper is a bundle, right? It's trying to, in most cases, it's trying to literally attract the attention of the entire population.
Yeah.
Right? And therefore it has revenue streams that are built upon the fact that it attracts attention from the entire population. There's a large portion of the media, I won't say most, I don't know the percentages, but there's a large portion of the media that is no longer, it's fan service, right? It's like I have the core dedicated group of people. As long as I'm making them happy, right, then I get money, right? And I have a business model that as long as there's enough people in my fan demographic, I can make money and I can exist.
Yeah.
Right. And that wasn't the case, you know, in the yonder years of media, right? There were zines and there were alt media and there were things that were designed to try and capture niche audiences, but the scale didn't work.
Right.
Right. I can publish anything on the internet for free, or basically free.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, Substack is essentially free.
Yeah.
You get paid a portion of what people pay you. And that's how Substack makes their money. They take a cut of every subscription fee that you earn. And so, you know, that cuts out advertising. So you're not subject to the influence of advertisers, but it's the sort of essence of audience capture. You have the freedom to build an audience, but once you have that as your revenue base, and particularly like the way to build an audience through social media is to get more specific and more extreme with your point of view. You collect a lot of people that think the same way as you do. And so you sort of get caught in this loop of having to serve them information that confirms their priors. And yeah, that leads to this phenomena of capture we've talked about.
Yeah. There's just no, you know, it's a very logical chain. You know, it's a very easy sequence to understand, you know, and once you understand that once you can get to scale, right? That was the problem, right? You know, in 1988, like I could have had all the same ideas as whatever Substack or YouTube or whatever it is, but I could not scale my idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I could not get the audience because the audience in my town was not big enough to support me. Right? The audience within range of what I could potentially broadcast over was not big enough.
So the internet enabled scale.
The
in a way
internet
that previously
enables
was not
scale
possible.
for niche interests.
Okay.
Right? And in many ways, that's great.
Yeah.
You can say, oh, that's great. Like, look at all these niche hobbies that people can pursue and, find their people, all that kind of stuff. The problem is when one of the costs of those benefits is that you lose, we didn't have in place before, have not replaced now, a means of adjudicating dispute so that dispute can become productive. It's just everybody for themselves based on whatever they feel like.
Yeah. Do your own research.
Do
It's
your own
become the
research,
mantra.
right? And, your evidence is as good as mine. Your experience is as good as my study. All of the, and it's just it's very hard to get to some form of agreement about what reality is. Again, just step one of policy analysis 101. It's hard to get to some agreement about reality when the most engaged people, i.e. the people that are supporting audiences and the people that are then having the discourse about it, have no means of resolving their disputes.
So what are some alternative models? I mean, public media is an alternative model. We're here on Montana Public Radio this evening. Their model is based on a large number of small donations and no advertising. I mean, they do have sponsors, organizations, corporations that purportedly support the institution of public media and are less interested in supporting particular types of content, at least in theory. So that seems like a mechanism, not a perfect one.
I think we're maybe reaching the point where this is fundamentally a cultural problem.
Okay.
Right? This is fundamentally about, like, as a culture, we have to decide what counts as evidence and what doesn't. And as a culture, we have to make sure that we have empowered institutions who can agree on those and then impose them.
I mean, I would go a step further than that. As a culture, we need to decide that we want a shared view of the world. Like, we want to be like a shared set of facts is an end state that we all desire.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And we've lost that.
Yeah, and look, and I don't want to be overconfident in a particular version of the facts, right? The whole point of life, in some sense, is to continue to learn.
Yes.
And sometimes we're going to be wrong about things.
Epistemological humility.
That's right. There you go.
That's a fancy academic word.
There you go. Exactly, right? But you have to approach this with some humility, but at the same time, not so much humility that you can never say there's some sort of truth that we can agree upon. As the best truth available to us at this point in time, right? And I think that's in some sense where we have to get back to, which is, I will acknowledge that this may not be the perfect truth, but given what we know as of this moment, this is the best version of the truth.
Yeah.
And like, we should be able to say, yeah, that's the best version of the truth, right? And in cases where we really don't have a good version of the truth, we should be able to say that. Right.
And not be pilloried for that.
That's right. But we should be able to become confident about the things in the world that we can in fact describe. Right. And the things in the world where the evidence base has grown. And it's important that the institutions that are amassing that evidence base be credible in themselves, right? Which means that they also have some means of adjudicating things. They don't create incentives that are bad incentives, right? That basically mean that, yeah, you've got to just keep following along with the tide of whatever the current scientific consensus is.
Sure.
And, we've seen lots of bad examples of, academic capture, right? Where, people just do whatever the current fad is, and they just keep saying whatever it is. And then and this builds on itself. Look how many studies all say the same thing.
Yeah, and I think what exacerbates that too, or a factor that exacerbates that, is there's there's declining ideological diversity in these institutions of higher learning that produce research. So if everybody sort of thinks and views the world the same way at a university, it just limits the range of ideas that are permissible to talk about and how they're talked about. And that has a consequence because it reduces. I mean, the idea of a university is a place where ideas can get stress tested. And if you're putting less stress on the ideas, they just don't hold up as they used to over time.
That's right. Right. When the whole point of the academic enterprise or the research enterprise is to be able to come up with falsifiable, descriptions of, so here's the hypothesis, we tested it, all this kind of stuff. And when it becomes like, no, we're not going to adjudicate based on some agreed upon, and look, we can agree that we can change the methods that we agree upon, right? That should be, the process piece can be, in dispute. But if the agreed upon methods all point in a particular answer to a particular answer, then we should be able to agree that that's the answer. But we also shouldn't basically say, oh, well, we're just going to agree that that's the answer because that's what makes us feel good.
Yeah.
Right. Once we start basically saying, well, my morals or some moral judgment tells me that that's the right answer and not just this is the outcome of the methods, then then you don't get the productive. The academic discourse is no longer productive. It's something more akin to, I think what you would children of the 80s would think of as, speaking to the party, right? I just must agree with what the party line is, right? And the party line is, I now agree with the party line.
Sure.
And my favorite areas of economics are the ones where people are arguing.
It's where we're learning.
Right? Because, I learn when they argue, right? They dig in and they're like, this person in this paper made this particular assumption. And this assumption drives their whole thing. Do we, and now we can have a debate about whether we think that's the best assumption for dealing with this hard problem that we're having to deal with. And, there's the impact of the minimum wage unemployment, like we talked about that last month.
Yes.
Has been an ongoing heated debate for 20 plus years, right? Measurement of inequality, right? And particularly upper tail inequality as a enormous, and like the bad part of this is that these people, I think, don't really like each other, right? There's definitely some taking things personally, it seems, in these debates.
And maybe that's one of the disincentives is this like interpersonal discomfort, conflict. Like we need to create systems where we can maybe do this with more collegiality. And, I think the way having these fights work themselves out in academic papers is one thing, but when we get researchers yelling at each other directly in Twitter, that's another thing. Yeah. So there are some incentives for this more inflammatory culture.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of the problem, right? Is it used to be, I could be an academic and I would probably never encounter you.
Yeah.
But the ease with which we now can convene, both in person and not, means that I'm now going to have to, learn how to get along with you. And maybe I sand some edges off of what I really think because I'm trying to, get along or, but disagreement is disagreeable, right? Like, the point is that those of you who are low on the agreeableness scale of the big five personality dimensions, you have a role in society. Right. And it's okay to be disagreeable, but we need you to be disagreeable in the service of producing constructive dialogue, not being disagreeable in the service of being destructive of us having any dialogue.
So that was an interesting sort of component of the paper that Alex Metcalf and I published about wolves. And that was that people were sort of adjusting their attitudes toward wolves based on what they thought their peers thought. And we've talked in here about reasoning from antagonism often, that you're going to think the opposite of what your outgroup thinks, for a variety of reasons, but that's how you form your position. In this case, the the variable of in-group policing seems to be driving the discourse. And that kind of jives with a lot of the dynamics we have been discussing, that the consequences of violating the script of your in-group are higher. And to violate the script of, to cooperate with the other side on any issue, you kind of have to violate the script of your in-group. So there's all these disincentives to collaboration. You can get ostracized from your in-group, and you're not going to get welcomed by your out-group for doing it, but you're going to get turned away by your in-group.
Yeah, and I think, you asked a while ago about, well, what are some other things that are driving these kind of changes, right? And we kind of talked about some market mechanisms.
Yeah.
But, I'm a big part of this, and why I think this is a cultural issue is, why am I so concerned about what my supposed in-group thinks?
Right.
Right? Like, what's in that for me? Why is this somehow where's the tangible stuff here? Right? Because I feel like it's all a fiction, right? Like, I want my supposed in-group to, quote, win, so I must agree with them on whatever so that they can pursue some particular set of policies. And yet the policies that are often pursued are not ultimately the ones that are the things that ultimately matter to me.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, why marry myself to this identity of this in-group? Why have this identity? Why put myself in a position where some alternative version of fact is a threat to identity? Because that's the core, right? That's how you get to this audience capture idea, right? Is there's a bunch of people for whom information contrary to their identity is a threat to their identity. And so I don't want to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I want to spend all my time in media. So rather than just say, oh, I don't want to hear the threat and I'm not going to listen to anything, please find me somebody who will tell me exactly what I want to hear.
Right. We enter into the echo chamber, as it were. Fortunately, MTPR is not an echo chamber. Public radio in general is a place where you can at least fight against some of these incentives or be less vulnerable to them. But is journalism, is this an example of market failure, as an economist would think about it? Because you argued for a cultural solution that's outside of the markets.
Yeah, I do think there is a component of this which is a market failure, right? And the analogy I'll draw is there's a paper now on social media, right, which argues that even users of social media platforms would pay more than they're willing to pay to keep the platform.
Oh, yeah.
To get everybody to stop using the platform.
These are the product traps, right?
It's a product trap,
yeah.
Right. And, I suspect that many of us would pay the people who are the amount of money that the market is willing to pay to make the people who make their money dividing us go away. Exceeds the amount of money that those who are willing to pay to keep them around are willing to pay.
Yeah.
Problem is that there's no mechanism for me to pay you to go away, right? To collect the pennies from every person who would be like, yeah, I would like this discourse to go away. I would like to, these extremes to go away. And let me pay you, no free speech violations here, just market.
Yeah.
Right? To have you and it would be a really interesting test, right? How many people are true believers in what they have to say and are like, no, there's no amount of money, or the amount of money that you can collect is insufficient to pay me to go away.
Sure.
Right? Versus the people who would be like, great, you're going to pay me this every year to not do this?
Yeah. The advertisers might try to interrupt that.
And look, it doesn't work as an equilibrium, because then now I have an incentive to then start saying the things that you don't want me to hear.
Sure.
But that's why it's a market failure.
But it's a fun idea.
But that's why it's a market. Yeah. But it's a trap. And I think it's a trap even for many of the people who are consuming it.
Yeah.
They may not realize it as much as social media because we don't talk about it in the same ways. Right. But certainly within families, I can imagine there's a lot of people who would be willing to pay money to get, for instance, their parents to stop consuming the media that they consume. But just to make that media go away altogether so that I don't have to pay attention to it, yeah, I don't consume enough media to feel like I'm in those traps, but but yeah, I can certainly see how the product market trap idea is at least somewhat analogous to what we're dealing with
Yeah,
here.
that probably intuitively strikes as correct for anybody stuck in a doom scroll. Anyway, opened a lot of doors, meandered a bit, but Bryce, as always, I learned a lot, and we uncovered some important stuff. So thanks for being here today.
Happy to be here as always, Justin.
All right, bonus segment is the Parent Trap. This is month 3 of the Parent Trap. We're gonna keep it rolling. What do you think? And for listeners new to the Parent Trap is where Bryce and I commiserate about our misadventures in parenting. Do you have a Parent Trap?
Why don't you go first while I try and remember what I was going to say?
Yeah, so I have a Parent Trap. I'm titling it Mandatory Fun. There was a time when my kids were younger, when they had less autonomy and certainly less ability to transport themselves to other places and fewer friends and all those sorts of things, where we engaged in what I called mandatory fun. A good example would be girls were going on a hike today. Girls were going on a bike ride. And it would take a lot.
My wife does a lot of mandatory fun.
Yeah, Maggie sort of exudes mandatory fun, I would think. Anyway, and, it would take a lot of work at the front end and a lot of sugar and a lot of bribing, but we get out the door and we do something. And
it's a miracle how quickly, once you get out the door, it all starts working.
It took the girls I don't know, an astonishing number of hikes to figure out that I wasn't actually hiding the M&Ms at the turnaround time ahead of time. That I really had them in my pocket. But anyway, any trick would work, right? And the point was we were going to go out. We're going to have a shared experience. We're going to use our bodies, experience nature, do all the things, right? And as my daughters have aged, they are now 14 and 16, I am loving how they're developing autonomy. They are doing a lot of the things we lament are in decline amongst children. They're spending more time outside with their friends. They're making plans. They're socializing. My older daughter's driving. They're out there doing stuff. And I am grateful that, to my knowledge, they appear to be making good choices generally and are trustworthy. And so I'm grateful for that. But it's making it harder to plan things together. And I'm assuming a more passive role because from one standpoint, it's like they're thriving. They're out with their people doing their thing, and I have less of a role. But as a dad, I do kind of crave hey, girls, let's do something together, whether that's going to a meal, watching a movie, going on an outing of some kind. So it's just getting harder to do mandatory fun. And the phones don't make it easier. And yeah, I want some mandatory fun. I miss it. I feel like we need it. But I'm finding myself conflicted about how mandatory am I willing to make it, and how possible is it for me to make it mandatory?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we're living parallel lives because, yeah, this would be, probably was what I was going to talk about is exactly this idea, right? Which is, my oldest is in between your two.
That's right.
But she now can drive.
Yeah.
Right. And
should we say she's now licensed to drive?
She's licensed to drive. Yes, that's right. Correct. She seems to be doing okay, though.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I was concerned, but we now have the sample size is getting larger.
Yes.
And, it seems to be going okay. And yeah, I don't feel like I see her as much, but I'm also trying to embrace all the things that I've been lamenting about, the larger trends in society and be like, this is what I view childhood as, right? As right, when I come teach your class, right, the first graph I put up, the first question I ask is, I want you to think back to when your parents were your age, and you're mostly freshmen, so roughly 18. I'm basically asking about, think back to when their parents were seniors in high school.
Yeah.
How many times a week do you think they spent, they hung out with friends or hung out with friends more than 3 times, or I can't remember.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Right. And then I asked them how often they did as their senior. Right. And your students are very representative, and they, when we were in high school, it was 80% were regularly hanging out with their friends over the course of the week. And now it's more like 50. So yeah, I'm very pleased when, my high school age daughter is out doing high school aged things, right?
Yeah.
Like
it's a win of a sort.
I feel like that's the developmentally appropriate thing based on my own experience.
Successful launch.
Right? You're supposed to, like, when you have basketball practice on Saturday, just not come home, right?
Yeah.
Like, like you go from basketball practice to lunch to somebody's house to, dinner, and maybe at some point we make you come home, right? But like, I'm trying to embrace it, and then you try and squeeze in the mandatory fun when they happen to be around, and it's less mandatory now, more like, hey, like, we're doing this, and hope that they join. But I'm very curious if our experience is not representative, right? If it's something weird about us, we live in the same neighborhood.
Like you and me, or dads, or our neighborhood,
or Missoula or Montana or whatever it is. There was a big survey actually that just came out that actually surveyed 24,000 parents, so that has representative samples for every state, and I think 6,000 teenagers.
Okay.
And asked us a wonderful array of questions about, parenting and, childhood experiences and all that kind of stuff. And, Montana's perspective in the data was not consistent with my own perspective.
Okay.
So I'm like, well, maybe we are living slightly different lives, but it wasn't totally out of line, but there were some things that were mismatched. Like Montana kids apparently spend less time than residents in other states playing outdoors.
Less time.
Interesting. I was like, well, there's maybe a little bit of that's weather, but it wasn't all weather, because it wasn't just all cold weather states that you were like, oh, that's what this is.
Sure.
But so maybe it's that I want to believe it's that things are changing. That's what I keep. In full transparency, that's what I keep looking for studies that are going to tell me, because that's what I want to hear.
Yeah, and that's fair.
But I don't believe them until they convince me of them. But that's what I'm hoping, is that we went through a really quick cycle of adoption, and now we're moving into a cycle of rejection that didn't take as long as cigarettes to go, hey, we shouldn't do that. And, but I don't know, maybe it's just something unique about our particular children, and the fact that they were forced to have mandatory fun.
And
as
they're reacting against it.
Well, no, is that they learned what fun is.
Yeah, they checked that box,
right?
and then they moved on.
And it was like, oh, screens are fine, but it's much more fun to, go for a hike.
Yeah.
To, hang out with your friends. Like, because the evidence is abundantly clear that is true. Right. And, I think part of the challenge that we saw with some of the younger generation, the generations that are slightly older than our kids, is they fell into the trap of the screen and they didn't learn that lesson.
Yeah. They can't get out of it. Anyway. So mandatory fun as the parent trap. We're working on it. And, maybe it's just like the next step is Thanksgiving dinner, and we just like cling for... Girls, I hope you come up for Thanksgiving this year, whatever the case may be. We're a few years away from
I think the
that.
hope is that they come back later and want to hang out with you. But I don't remember being a 15-year-old and really wanting to hang out at my house.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Like, that was not. I liked my family, but and obviously you had to be home a lot of the time.
That might be the moral of the story, Bryce. Hanging with your dad is just maybe not as cool.
It's just not as cool as it, as that lovely, 10, 11 period when they're, grown up enough that you can do stuff with them, but they're not yet like.
Yeah. Here we are, masters of the obvious, late in the parenting trap. Yeah. Anyway, thanks, Bryce. We'll talk next month.
All right. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks for listening to A New Angle. If you like what we do and want to support us directly, please consider a subscription at anewanglepodcast.com. A New Angle is recorded at Studio 49, a generous gift from alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. Our presenting sponsor is the Headwaters Foundation, working side by side with Western Montanans to improve the health of our communities. We are also supported by First Security Bank and the University of Montana College of Business, with additional help from CED, Drum Coffee, and Montana Public Radio. Keely Larson is our producer. Libby Riddle is our production assistant. And finally, John Brownell, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks made our music. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.